you're having a great day. Things here are going well. Had a knee replacement about a week ago, so recovering through that, but still a little sore. But figure we continue learning together in the book of Genesis. And we already looked at chapters 1, 2, and 3. And now we're going to look at chapter 4, which basically talks about the beginning of civilization on Earth. There's going to be some interesting things that we find out. We already know from our previous studies that God's perfect world was ruined by man. That by rebelling, sinning against God, God had to take action to protect His sovereignty and holiness. And He loved man so much that He didn't want man to continue to live in a state of separation from Him. So God cast man from the Garden of Eden. And just as God had warned, man died physically and spiritually. The physical part took a long time. Adam lived over 900 years. The spiritual part happened immediately. Fellowship was broken with God. And from here on out, the whole rest of the Bible is pointing toward a plan that God unfolds slowly, piece by piece, whereby man can be reconciled to himself and have renewed fellowship and eternal life. So now we're going to start see how man's depravity and original sin and continued sin drags mankind down, 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 down. But in the background we see God has a plan to restore man's fellowship with himself, with God, and to inherit eternal life. So let's start in chapter 4 and see what we pick up here. It said, now the man had relations with his wife Eve, and she conceived and gave birth to Cain, and she said, I have gotten a man-child with the help of the Lord. Now right away, it's easy to overlook these things, but Eve basically says, I got a man-child with the help of the Lord. She's crediting the Lord. She hasn't turned her back on God. She knows that fellowship has been broken, but she is giving God praise for things that happen in her life. And again she gave birth to his brother Abel, and Abel was a keeper of flocks, but Cain was a tiller of the ground. Verse 3, so it came about in the course of time that Cain brought an offering to the Lord of the fruit of the ground. I mentioned this before, but it's interesting that here we see that there is some kind of sacrificial system that's taking place here. The nuts and bolts of it aren't discussed. We don't know where they got this notion of substitutionary sacrifice. Maybe it's just a offering of praise, asking for God's forgiveness, but somehow God has communicated to them that there needs to be a sacrifice for sin. And so we see that early on, here Cain's bringing an offering of fruit of the ground to the Lord. Verse 4, and Abel on his part also brought of the firstling of his flock and their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and for his offering. But for Cain and for his offering he had no regard. So Cain became very angry, and his countenance fell. Now, there's no indication that Cain, even gave a thought to, well, why is my offering not acceptable? I think somehow a blood offering was expected in these cases, and Cain was saying, I'm not going to mess with that anymore. I'm going to take, some other offerings. It might not be quite as difficult, may not be quite as God honoring, but this is what I'm going to do. Kind of a stubbornness we see there, and but he became angry, and instead of saying, well, what can I do to make this acceptable, he became angry. Then the Lord said to Cain, why are you angry, and why is your countenance fallen? If you do well, will not your countenance be lifted up? And if you do not do well, sin is crouching at the door, and its desire is for you, but you must master it. In other words, you need to get a grip. If you do what's right, and he must have known that this grain offering was not right. If you do what's right, you'll be happy. Your countenance will be lifted up. You'll be in good spirits. If you do what's wrong, and he must have known that this was a shortcut or wrong, that your countenance is going to be fallen. You're going to be unhappy. And if you let this go too far, sin is crouching right at the door, and it's going to cause you even greater problems, which it does. And Cain told Abel his brother, and it came about when they were in the field that Cain rose up against Abel his brother and killed him. Not much more explanation than that. Just that Cain hated Abel because he was accepted and Cain wasn't. And he decided to solve the situation by killing his brother. Verse 9, then the Lord said to Cain, where is Abel your brother? And he said, I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper? Pretty sarcastic right there. And God said, what have you done? Well, God knew what he'd done. The voice of your brother's blood is crying to me from the ground. And now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you cultivate the ground, it shall no longer yield its strength to you. You shall be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth. And Cain said to the Lord, my punishment is too great to bear. Now wait a minute. You just committed murder. You just killed your brother. And now you're complaining because your punishment is too great. I think we see a lot of that in the world today, where people don't want to take responsibility. They don't want to ask for forgiveness. They say, my penalty's too great. But there doesn't seem to be any remorse here or anything. It's just, my punishment's too great. Verse 14, behold, thou hast driven me this day from the face of the ground, and from thy face I shall be hidden, and thou shalt be a vagrant and a wanderer on the earth, and it will come about that whoever finds me will kill me. So the Lord said to him, therefore whoever kills Cain, vengeance will be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord appointed a sign for Cain, lest anyone finding him should slay him. A mark, maybe of some kind, so that people would know this is Cain. God has said, don't hurt him. Then Cain went out from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. And Cain had relations with his wife, and she conceived and gave birth to Enoch. And he built a city and called the name of the city Enoch, after the name of his son. Probably should mention now, when he talks about had relations with his wife, where did this wife come from? Well, it's obvious that if Adam and Eve were the first man and woman on earth, that they had lots of children. Now, the Bible mentions specific children, this son, this daughter, this son. But you'll find that a lot of times in these genealogies, when these children are mentioned, it's not a complete list. So you have Adam and Eve living hundreds of years. Just think of how many children they have had. and then their children living hundreds of years, how many children they've had. So it's clear that early on there was intermarriage, and Cain here had married his sister. And back then that was not prohibited. The gene pool was so pure at the beginning of mankind that the likelihood of any kind of deviation or mutation or anything like that was very, very remote. So there was really no prohibition by God from intermarrying or having children, brother-sister relationships like that. One husband, one wife, yes, that was a concept early on. But you have early on this marriage within family with very little risk of any kind of defects, birth defects, or anything like that. It wasn't for many, many years later, I'm going to say a couple of thousand years later, that incest was banned, where you could not have sexual relations with, brother, sister, aunts, uncles, that kind of thing. But that's going to come way down the road. But here, no. Okay. Got off track there. We'll go back to verse 18. Now to Enoch was born Irad, and Irad became the father of Mehujael. I'll get all these names all messed up, and don't worry about it. And Mehujael became the father of Methusael, and Methusael became the father of Lamech. And Lamech took to himself 2 wives. So already we have people breaking God's best plan, which is one woman, one wife. We already have early on man deviating from that. So he took 2 wives. One was Ada, and the name of the other was Zillah. And Ada gave birth to Jabal, and he was the father of those who dwell in tents and have livestock. And his brother's name was Jubal. He was the father of all of those who play the lyre and the pipe. So we see musical instruments early on. As for Zillah, she also gave birth to Tubal-Cain, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Wow, early on, before Adam has died, we already have the ability to forge implements of bronze and iron. That's a pretty interesting technology early on in man's existence. But again, as we talked about before, man was in a more perfect state then. He was using his mind at closer to 100%, where we use very little of our brain now, according to scientists. They lived many, many, many years, hundreds of years. So the accumulated knowledge wasn't just passed down in writing, but by actual hundreds of years of actual personal experience. So these were brilliant people. They could do a lot with what was found on this earth, even though God had levied certain curses on man and the planet. But yeah, the forger of all implements of bronze and iron, and the sister of Tubal-Cain was Naamah. Verse 23, and Lamech said to his wives, Ada and Zillah, listen to my voice, you wives of Lamech. Give heed to my speech, for I have killed a man for wounding me, and a boy for striking me. If Cain is avenged 7-fold, then Lamech 77-fold. Wow. So here's a guy, again, the descendant of Adam, just an example of how man is going down, 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 is bragging, kind of boasting in a threatening manner that I killed a guy just for bumping into me, well, for wounding me. So, just outright killed him. Yeah. And he killed a boy for striking him. So here's a guy that's out of control, and he's telling people, don't mess with me or same thing's going to happen to you, and boasting about it. Wow. Let's go to verse 25. And Adam had relations with his wife again, and she gave birth to a son and named him Seth, for she said, God has appointed me another offspring in place of Abel, for Cain killed him. And to Seth, to him also a son was born, and he called his name Enosh. Then men began to call upon the name of the Lord. So we see man going downhill. We see guys like Lamech, but then we see there's still a remnant. There's still people that are calling on the name of God, that are trusting God, that are believing in God, that are, in a sense, taking responsibility for what's happened, and they're seeking God's way of getting them out of this mess. Ad-libbing there, paraphrasing, but here you have man going down, but you still had some that were seeking God's favor and trying to renew that relationship with God. So we'll stop there, and next time we'll talk about the period of time from Adam all the way up to the time of Noah, which will be a very interesting and dramatic. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm going to keep doing these, not because there's been a lot of views or interest, but because it's fun for me. I enjoy going through these and reviewing things that I've learned in the past, and it's just an enjoyable for me to do it. So I hope it will be enjoyable for you as well, and we'll all learn something together out of it. Anyway, thanks for watching. God bless. We'll see you next time. Bye-bye.